The dust swirled around Jake Morrison's boots as he rode into the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge on that scorching August morning in 1887. His horse, a reliable Mustang named Thunder, was tired from the 3-day journey across the harsh Arizona territory. Jake pulled his worn hat down to shield his weathered face from the blazing sun. At 32, he had spent most of his life wandering from town to town, working cattle ranches and keeping to himself. Cedar Ridge was like many other settlements he had seen, a handful of wooden buildings lined along a dusty main street, with a saloon, general store, and sheriff's office. But something felt different here. The air was thick with tension, and the few people he saw on the street looked nervous, glancing around as if they expected trouble. Jake tied Thunder to the hitching post outside the saloon and pushed through the swinging doors. The place was unusually quiet for midday. Only a few men sat at tables, speaking in hushed voices. The bartender, a heavy-set man with graying hair, looked up as Jake approached. "Whiskey," Jake said simply, placing a coin on the bar. The bartender poured the drink and slid it across. "You're new in town," he observed. "Name's Murphy. I own this place." "Jake Morrison, just passing through." Jake took a sip of the whiskey and noticed Murphy glancing nervously toward the other customers. "Might want to keep passing," Murphy said quietly. "Town's got some troubles brewing." Before Jake could ask what kind of troubles, the saloon doors burst open. 3 men in dusty clothes and gun belts strode in, their spurs jingling with each step. The leader, a tall man with a black mustache and cruel eyes, surveyed the room before his gaze settled on Jake. "Well, well," the man said with a sneer. "Got ourselves a stranger, boys." Jake turned slowly to face them, his hand resting casually near his Colt .45. "Don't want any trouble, friend. Just having a drink." The tall man laughed coldly. "Name's Briggs. I'm the law in this town, and around here strangers need to understand how things work." He stepped closer. "We got us an execution tomorrow. 7 Apache women. Gonna be quite a show." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "Execution? What's their crime?" Briggs's eyes narrowed. "Murder. Killed 3 good white men in cold blood. Judge Harwick passed sentence yesterday." He leaned against the bar. "Course, some folks might call it justice for what their people been doing to settlers." Something in Briggs's tone made Jake's instincts flare. He had spent enough time on the frontier to know when something didn't smell right. "That's a lot of women for one crime," he said carefully. "They're all sisters." Another man spoke up. "Whole family of savages." Jake finished his whiskey and set the glass down. "Where they being held?" Briggs studied Jake with suspicious eyes. "Old mission building on the edge of town." "Why you asking, stranger?" "Just curious. Like I said, I'm passing through." Jake tipped his hat. "Gentlemen." As he turned to leave, Briggs called out. "Morrison, wasn't it? Might want to be long gone by tomorrow morning. Town gets a bit unfriendly during executions." Jake pushed through the doors and untied Thunder, his mind racing. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. 7 sisters accused of murdering 3 men? In his experience, Apache women rarely committed such violent crimes, especially not in groups. He decided to take a look at this old mission building. The sun was beginning to set as Jake rode slowly through the town's outskirts. The mission was easy to spot, a crumbling adobe building with wooden bars hastily nailed over the windows. 2 guards sat outside, rifles across their laps, playing cards on an overturned crate. Jake dismounted and approached on foot, staying in the shadows of nearby buildings. As he got closer, he could hear voices from inside the mission, women's voices speaking in the Apache language. They sounded young, scared. Moving carefully around the building, Jake found a window where the wooden bars had a gap just wide enough to peer through. Inside, he saw 7 Native American women huddled together on the dirt floor. They ranged in age from about 16 to perhaps 25. Their clothes were torn, and several showed signs of rough treatment, bruises on their faces and arms. The eldest of the women was trying to comfort the youngest, who was quietly crying. Jake's heart clenched as he watched them. These didn't look like cold-blooded killers. They looked like victims. As he watched, one of the guards stood up and walked around the building. Jake pressed himself against the wall, waiting for the man to pass. The guard stopped just a few feet away and lit a cigarette. "Shame we gotta hang 'em tomorrow," the guard said to his companion. "Especially the pretty ones." The other guard laughed. "Briggs says it's necessary. Can't have word getting out about what really happened at the Morrison Ranch." Jake's blood ran cold. The Morrison Ranch, that was the name the Apache had given to his father's old spread, 20 miles south of town. His father had been dead for 5 years, but Jake still owned the land, though he rarely visited it. "Yeah," the first guard continued. "Lucky thing Judge Harwick was willing to play along. These girls just happened to be in the wrong place when Briggs needed someone to blame." "What about the real killers?" "What about 'em? They're Briggs' men. He ain't gonna turn on his own crew for a bunch of Apaches." Jake had heard enough. As the guards settled back to their card game, he crept away into the darkness. His mind was reeling with the implications of what he had just learned. These women were innocent. They were being framed for murders committed by Briggs's own men, possibly at or near his father's old ranch. He knew he couldn't let this execution happen, but he was just one man against what appeared to be a corrupt sheriff and his gang. The judge was clearly in on it too, which meant the law wouldn't help. As Jake rode back toward town, a plan began forming in his mind. It was risky, maybe even impossible, but he couldn't live with himself if he rode away and let 7 innocent women die. He had until dawn to figure out how to save them and expose the truth about this conspiracy. The stakes were clear. 7 lives hung in the balance, and only he knew the truth. Tomorrow would test everything Jake Morrison believed about right and wrong, and whether one cowboy could stand against corruption and injustice in a lawless frontier town. Jake spent the night in the livery stable, hidden in the hayloft where he could watch the town and plan his next move. Sleep came in brief, restless moments as his mind worked through the pieces of the conspiracy he had stumbled upon. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon, he had a plan that was dangerous, but might just work. First, he needed to learn more about what had really happened at his father's old ranch. Jake saddled Thunder quietly and rode out of town before anyone was awake. The 20-mile journey took him through familiar territory he hadn't seen in years. The old ranch house came into view just as the sun cleared the mountains. What he found there made his blood boil. The house had been ransacked recently. Furniture was overturned, windows broken, and there were clear signs of a violent struggle. But more telling were the 3 graves hastily dug behind the barn. Fresh graves, marked only with crude wooden crosses. Jake examined the scene carefully. Drag marks in the dirt showed where bodies had been pulled from the house to the burial site. Spent bullet casings glittered in the morning sun, and dark stains on the porch told the story of violence. But these weren't the marks of an Apache raid. The bullet holes were from close range, execution style. Near the corral, Jake found something that made everything clear. A silver belt buckle with the initials TB engraved on it. Tom Briggs. The sheriff had been here, and recently. As Jake pieced together what must have happened, hoofbeats in the distance caught his attention. 3 riders were approaching fast. Jake quickly mounted Thunder and rode behind the barn, watching from cover as the men reached the ranch. It was Briggs and 2 of his deputies, the same men from the saloon. They dismounted and walked straight to the graves, talking in voices that carried on the morning air. "Think anyone will come looking for the Patterson boys?" one deputy asked. "Who's gonna look?" Briggs replied. "They were drifters, just like their victims here. No family, no friends who matter." He kicked at the dirt on one of the graves. "By the time anyone asks questions, those Apache girls will be buried too, and the whole thing will be forgotten." The second deputy seemed nervous. "What if that stranger from yesterday starts poking around? Morrison, wasn't it? That's the same name as this ranch." Briggs laughed coldly. "If he's smart, he's already left town. If not, well, accidents happen on the frontier." Jake's jaw clenched as he listened. The Patterson boys. He remembered them now. 3 brothers who had worked for his father years ago. Troublemakers who had been fired for stealing cattle. It seemed they had returned to the ranch for some reason, only to be murdered by Briggs and his men. "What was in it for the Pattersons anyway?" the nervous deputy asked. "Why'd they want to dig up that old business?" "They found out about the silver," Briggs said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "Somehow they learned about the mine up in Devil's Canyon. Came here thinking they could blackmail me about what happened to the Apache chief's family last year." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. This conspiracy went deeper than he had imagined. There was a silver mine involved, and something terrible had happened to an Apache family. The 7 sisters being held for execution must be connected to that family. "Should have killed the Pattersons quietly," the first deputy muttered. "Now we got this mess with the Apache girls." "Had to be public," Briggs explained. "People needed to see justice being done for the murders here. Can't have folks thinking the area ain't safe. Bad for business." He spit in the dirt. "Besides, those girls saw too much when we hit their camp. They know what we did to their father and brothers." Now Jake understood the full scope of the conspiracy. Briggs and his men had murdered an Apache chief and his sons, probably to keep them away from the silver mine. The 7 sisters had witnessed the massacre and had to be silenced. When the Patterson brothers showed up asking questions, they were killed too. Briggs then framed the sisters for the Patterson murders, planning to execute them and bury the truth forever. The 3 men mounted up and rode back toward town, leaving Jake alone with his dark discoveries. He looked at the fresh graves and felt a burning anger at the injustice of it all. 7 innocent women were going to die in a few hours unless he could stop it. Jake rode hard back to Cedar Ridge, his mind racing through possibilities. He couldn't fight Briggs and all his men alone. The judge was corrupt, so legal channels were useless. But maybe he could turn the townspeople against Briggs if they knew the truth. Back in town, Jake could see preparations for the execution beginning. A crude gallows had been erected in the town square, and people were gathering despite the early hour. Most looked uncomfortable, but few seemed willing to challenge the sheriff's authority. Jake made his way to the general store where he found the owner, an older man named Henderson, arranging goods on his shelves with shaking hands. "Terrible business today," Jake said quietly. Henderson looked up, his face pale. "Don't feel right hanging women, even Apache women. But Briggs says it's the law." "What if I told you those women didn't commit any murders?" Jake asked. The store owner's eyes widened. "What are you saying, stranger?" Jake quickly explained what he had seen and heard at the ranch, keeping his voice low. Henderson listened with growing horror, his face becoming more troubled with each detail. "You're saying Briggs killed the Patterson boys himself?" Henderson whispered. "And an Apache family before that, probably for their land near some silver mine." Jake leaned closer. "Those sisters are witnesses to murder, not murderers themselves." Henderson was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the implications. "Even if that's true, what can we do? Briggs controls the law here, and Judge Harwick ain't gonna listen to accusations against the sheriff." "We need to stop that execution long enough for people to hear the truth," Jake said. "Once folks know what really happened, they won't stand for it." "That's easier said than done. Briggs has 6 deputies, all armed and loyal. They'll shoot anyone who interferes." Jake nodded grimly. "I'm not asking you to fight, but maybe you could help spread the word quietly. Get people thinking, asking questions. Sometimes that's all it takes." As Henderson considered this, the sound of a wagon rumbling down the street drew their attention. Through the window, they could see the 7 Apache sisters being transported to the gallows, their hands bound, their faces showing fear, but also a dignity that made Jake's heart ache. Time was running out. In less than an hour, those women would be dead unless Jake could find a way to expose Briggs's conspiracy and turn the town against him. The odds seemed impossible, but Jake Morrison had never walked away from a fight when innocent lives were at stake. As he watched the wagon disappear around the corner toward the town square, he knew this would be the most important battle of his life. The town square was packed with nearly 100 people as Jake made his way through the crowd. Men, women, and even some children had gathered to witness the execution. Jake could see the discomfort on many faces. This wasn't entertainment for most of them, but a grim duty they felt obligated to observe. Sheriff Briggs stood near the gallows, checking his pocket watch with satisfaction. His 6 deputies were positioned around the square, rifles ready, eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Judge Harwick sat in a chair near the platform, looking pale but determined to see the sentence carried out. The 7 Apache sisters stood on the gallows platform, nooses around their necks. The eldest sister, who Jake had seen comforting the others the night before, looked out at the crowd with steady eyes. Despite her bound hands and the rope around her throat, she maintained a dignity that impressed even some of the hostile townspeople. Jake had spent the last 30 minutes moving through the crowd, quietly sharing what he had discovered with anyone who would listen. Henderson had helped, whispering to other business owners. Word was spreading, creating ripples of doubt and questioning murmurs. But Jake knew it wouldn't be enough unless he could force a confrontation that would expose the truth to everyone at once. As Briggs stepped forward to read the execution order, Jake pushed through the crowd toward the platform. "Sheriff Briggs," he called out loudly, "before you proceed, there's something the people of this town need to know." The crowd fell silent. Briggs's face darkened as he spotted Jake. "You should have left town, Morrison. This ain't your concern." "It is when innocent women are about to die for crimes they didn't commit," Jake replied, his voice carrying across the square. He climbed onto a nearby wagon so everyone could see and hear him clearly. "This man is disturbing the peace," Briggs shouted. "Deputies, arrest him!" But Jake was already talking, his words stopping the advancing deputies in their tracks. "These women didn't murder the Patterson brothers. Sheriff Briggs did." A gasp went up from the crowd. Judge Harwick half rose from his chair, his face shocked. "That's a lie," Briggs snarled, his hand moving to his gun. "Is it?" Jake pulled the silver belt buckle from his pocket and held it high. "I found this at the Morrison Ranch, where the murders actually took place. TB, Tom Briggs. Your buckle, Sheriff, left behind when you killed those 3 men." The crowd began murmuring loudly. Several people recognized the distinctive buckle that Briggs wore daily. Briggs's face went white, then red with rage. "You planted that! This stranger is trying to save a bunch of murderous savages." "Then explain this," Jake continued, his voice growing stronger. "I was at the ranch this morning. I heard you and your deputies talking about the real reason these women have to die. They witnessed you murdering their father and brothers near Devil's Canyon, didn't they? They know about your silver mine." The murmuring became an uproar. Several townspeople began shouting questions. Jake could see doubt spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Judge Harwick stood up, his face pale. "Sheriff Briggs, what is this man talking about? What's silver mine?" Before Briggs could answer, one of his deputies, the nervous one from the ranch, suddenly spoke up. "It's true," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear and guilt. "We killed the Apache chief and his son 6 months ago. These girls saw everything." "Shut up, you fool!" Briggs roared, drawing his gun and pointing it at his own deputy. The crowd scattered in panic as other deputies also drew their weapons, confused about who to aim at. Jake used the chaos to leap from the wagon and rush toward the gallows platform. "The girls are innocent," the deputy continued desperately. "We framed them for the Patterson murders. Briggs has been running an illegal mining operation on Apache land." Judge Harwick's face went ashen. "Sheriff, Lower your weapon. If these accusations are true, they're lies, Briggs screamed, but his wild eyes and desperate voice convinced no one. He swung his gun toward Jake, who was now climbing onto the gallows platform. I'll kill you for this, Morrison! As Briggs fired, Jake dove behind the platform support beam. The bullet splintered wood inches from his head. The eldest Apache sister, seeing her chance, somehow managed to slip her bound hands under her feet and grab a loose piece of rope from the gallows mechanism. "Look out!" she called in English, warning Jake as another deputy aimed at him. Jake rolled, drew his Colt .45, and fired in one smooth motion. The deputy's shot went wide as Jake's bullet found its mark. The man fell, clutching his shoulder. The crowd was in complete chaos now. Some people were running for cover, others were shouting for the truth, and still others were trying to reach the platform to free the women. Henderson and several other townspeople had grabbed tools and were advancing on the remaining deputies. Briggs, seeing his conspiracy collapsing around him, made a desperate decision. He climbed onto the gallows platform and grabbed the eldest sister, pressing his gun to her head. "Everyone back off, or she dies!" The crowd froze. Jake, still crouched behind cover, could see Briggs was beyond reason now, dangerous as a cornered animal. "It's over, Briggs," Jake called out. "Your own man confessed. The whole town knows the truth now." "I'll kill her," Briggs screamed. "I'll kill all of them before I let them testify against me." But the eldest sister was not as helpless as she appeared. With her hands now in front of her, she suddenly grabbed the rope that was meant for her own execution and swung it hard into Briggs's face. As he staggered backward, she twisted away from his grip. Jake seized the moment, charging up onto the platform. Briggs swung his gun toward him, but Jake was already diving forward. The two men crashed into each other, grappling for control of the weapon. The gun went off harmlessly into the air as they fought. Briggs was strong, but Jake's rage at the injustice he had uncovered gave him extra strength. With a powerful uppercut, he sent Briggs sprawling backward off the platform into the dirt below. The remaining deputies, seeing their leader defeated and faced with an angry crowd that now knew the truth, threw down their weapons and surrendered. Judge Harwick, shaken but trying to restore order, began shouting instructions for the deputies to be arrested and the innocent women to be freed. Jake quickly cut the ropes binding the 7 sisters. The eldest one looked at him with gratitude shining in her dark eyes. "You saved us," she said in careful English. "Why?" "Because it was right," Jake replied simply. "No one should die for crimes they didn't commit." As the townspeople secured Briggs and his co-conspirators, the full scope of the corruption began to emerge. The nervous deputy, eager to save himself, revealed everything: the illegal silver mine on Apache territory, the murder of the chief and his sons who had discovered it, the frame-up of the sisters, and the killing of the Patterson brothers who had tried to blackmail Briggs. Judge Harwick, desperate to distance himself from the scandal, claimed he had been deceived by false evidence. Whether that was true or not, he quickly ordered Briggs and his remaining loyal deputies to be charged with murder and conspiracy. As the sun reached its peak that day, instead of witnessing an execution of the innocent, the people of Cedar Ridge saw justice finally served. Briggs was locked in his own jail, awaiting trial for multiple murders. The 7 Apache sisters were free, their names cleared, and their dignity restored. Jake stood with them outside the jail as they prepared to return to their people. The eldest sister approached him one final time. "Our father spoke of white men who could be trusted," she said. "He said they were rare, but when found, they were worth more than silver. You are such a man, Jake Morrison." As Jake watched them ride away toward their homeland, he felt a satisfaction deeper than any he had known. He had arrived in Cedar Ridge as a drifter, planning to pass through unnoticed. Instead, he had exposed a conspiracy, saved 7 innocent lives, and helped a town reclaim its sense of justice. The silver mine was returned to the Apache people as part of the settlement. Briggs was eventually hanged for his crimes, and a new, honest sheriff was elected. Cedar Ridge began to rebuild its reputation as a place where law and order meant something. Jake Morrison rode out of town 3 days later, continuing his wandering ways. But the story of the lone cowboy who saved 7 Apache sisters from an unjust execution spread throughout the territory, becoming a legend that reminded people that sometimes one person willing to stand up for what's right can change everything.